Welcome to episode 32 of the Waterloo campaign, the Battle of Waterloo. Welcome and good to see you. If you're on Twitch, I'm live at the moment. And if you're on YouTube, good to see you. Or at every place that you're watching, you can leave a little comment. That'd be great. And I will endeavor to help you out, but I'm not saying I'm an expert on this. It's just an amateur kind of interest in the Battle of Waterloo that I've developed over the since childhood. I find it fascinating, but yeah, have a little comment. Tell me if I'm flying badly. Tell me if I got the year wrong. Tell me if you want to see something, and we'll go and have a fly over there. The idea of the Fly Past series is that we're quite relaxed. It's more of a sort of a background thing, really. But you can join me. I'm on Microsoft Flight Simulator, so if you catch me live, come in, swoop, try and get in front of me. All that good stuff. So we left episode 31. We have just got to Brussels, and I thought before we actually start the campaign, we'd have a look at the different armies that are going to be involved. So we've done a brief flyover some of the battlefields in previous episodes, just so you get an idea of the scale. And now we're going to have a look at some of the armies. And we'll fly around Brussels. This is photogrammic imagery, by the way. So this is how it actually looks. And this is the fascinating thing about using this technology, the flight simulator, is we can combine these cool things. And we can do something that we can never do in real life. And it's like fly a helicopter really low over the grounds of the battle. So we got talking about Wellington, basically, and how he's got to be where he is and the sort of guy he was. Wellington's victory in the peninsula was basically down to resource management, I would say. He never committed himself enough to be caught out. He was always a combination of keeping his troops away from danger, committing them when he had the advantage, and using his transport and supply system, and basically not being afraid or politically of having to retreat back to Lisbon in at certain times. Will you look at the Peninsular War? Yes, so we will be doing... I will do a series on the Peninsular War. That seems like a given. I also think I will probably do almost like a biography of the movements of Napoleon. I think that will be really cool. We could see how his journey from Corsica all the way through Europe and back again, and we can just trace his whole route. We'll do the same for Wellington as well. But as you can probably tell, this is going to be a while. I'm probably going to be another few months, even just on this subject. But yes, we will do the Peninsular War. And if you've got any suggestions, by the way, just bung them in the comments. I'm happy to take your suggestions, and if they align with what I'm interested in, then we'll do it. It tends to be basically that I've got a load of... I'm a bit of a amateur history fan myself, and if I'm reading something, then I will tend to want to go and see what it looks like on the ground. I'm one of those guys who always has his thumb on a map in a history book. And so you're always flicking backwards and forwards. So sometimes it's kind of cool to take some notes and then use this flight simulator to have a look at it in real life. So you get a real good perspective on what's going on. And one of the classic examples, if you go back and look at the series on D-Day, was looking at the British airborne action. You saw Pegasus Bridge, but there's a ridge there on that side of D-Day, which was really important. But you wouldn't really notice it on a map. You really only see it when you're in there or in something like this. And if you are watching and are interested in that sort of stuff, I really recommend Walking the Ground with James Holland and Al Murray. That's the sort of thing that inspired me to do something like this, basically to be able to check out how distances and topography affected the decisions on the day. So we are. So this is Brussels. Wellington. He when he gets to the peninsula, he very much tried to keep his organization of his army simple. He had operated on a thing like autonomous divisions. He wouldn't doesn't do the sort of the core type organization that the French do. It depended on the circumstances. He would tend to do the core thing if he couldn't pass on orders directly. So he was a bit of a control freak in that sense. Wasn't hugely trustworthy of other people. So he wanted, if he had the divisions in sight, then he would definitely try to keep control in that way. Whereas the Napoleon would have different corps operating in like little armies. So yeah, Wellington definitely preferred to give his orders directly, either word of mouth. He would actually ride up to people, or he would handwritten notes would be his method. And this would be for very simple actions. Go take this. It wouldn't be anything that could be interpreted in any other way. He definitely believed that his subordinates were not that he couldn't trust them, but he didn't find that they would be reliable enough, especially if they were given too much responsibility. And that a lot of the times they would try to take the initiative when it wasn't necessary, with some sort of like a bravado kind of ego thing going on. And you can see this in a lot of his anguish about the way that the artillery operated or the cavalry operated. He was always berating some element of his army for basically trying to second guess his orders. But his skill as a leader was basically putting his troops in the right position at the right time. And he would always had a tendency to be himself personally at the crisis point of any battle at any time. And that's the amazing thing that you find with him. So he will puts himself in danger time after time, because he's there at the crux of a battle. And we'll see this in the Battle of Waterloo as well. He continually puts himself in danger. It's amazing that he avoided injury. And he's got to remember as well the distances we're talking about here as well. He will ride all day long and then have a battle. He was superbly fit. He was an excellent horseman with great stamina, and that allowed him to get around the battlefields and campaign areas and at the right time. And you can see then when we look at get to Napoleon, he was similar, but his health was probably waning. He wasn't. He was getting less energetic the older he got. Wellington was definitely. I wouldn't say his strategy was straightforward, but he erred on the side of caution. His circumstances usually meant that he was always facing a numerically. He tried to make sure that if he could, that he would face his enemy when they were numerically inferior, and he couldn't with the Peninsular War. You can argue in India as well. The quality of his troops were important, but he always had inferior numbers, so he couldn't afford a grinding match. He couldn't afford an expensive victory. Whereas Napoleon would tend to, with the size of his armies, he could afford to have a meat grinder effect. He could have heavy casualties. But like I say, Wellington is not. He's cautious, yes. And he can afford to be. His job in the Peninsular War, for example, was definitely to just be a pain in Napoleon's rear, literally, to relieve the European armies by pulling resources away to the far side of Europe. But he could, as I say, when the conditions were favourable, then he would strike. And one of the big mistakes that his opponents would make was that they would assume that he was they mistook his being cautious with as a weakness, but as I say, he could easily turn around and there'll be a sting in the tail for anyone who was unwary. And when we get to the Peninsular War, we'll see many examples of that. So here we are, where this is Waterloo, by the way, the village of Waterloo. It was interesting enough. It's actually probably a mile. The battlefield is about a mile or so south of the village of Waterloo. It's on a ridge, the Mont Saint-Jean ridge. You can see the Lion's Mound here coming up. It was, I think, after the Battle of Waterloo, Blucher suggested that it would be named after the place where they met in the evening, which was called La Belle Alliance, which probably was a better name. But I think we'll see another side of Wellington where he wanted a name that was probably a little bit more easily to pronounce in English, and also made the focus more towards his headquarters rather than towards the Prussians. We flew over here in the last few episodes, and you can see this sort of ridge running along here, this very subtle ridge that makes this battlefield so beautiful. But we're running along now the British and Anglo-Dutch front line. We're heading east. And thank you. And the weird thing about this battlefield is that it's been ruined by the Lion's Mound, because all that earth that produces this mound was taken from the ridge itself. So as even Wellington said when he returned back here after the battle, he said paraphrase, he says something like, "Oh, they've ruined my battlefield," because all of this earth here is fake. It's man-made, and it was taken from this area here, which was actually the where the ridge was. And that Lion's Mound marks where the Prince of Orange was injured, and because he's a bit of a precocious little git, he decides that the Battle of Waterloo was all about him and no one else. So they decide to make a monument to his injury by digging up the whole battlefield. But we'll come to the Prince of Orange. He's an interesting character himself. But we're looking at the British Army before this campaign, and when we look at the map, we can see we are currently at this number 6. You've got Brussels ahead of you now. The British are looking down to the south to the Belgian border, and the most of the British army is actually stationed around from Edingen, Braine-le-Comte, this sort of area, to the south, west and west of Brussels. Because if you actually look at the main route from Paris, you would think that the quickest route to Brussels would actually be almost through Mons and this area, Lille, maybe, possibly. That's where Wellington was concerned about, because that's where his supply lines at Ghent to Ostend and Antwerp would be threatened the most. So the British were very much facing Mons more than Charleroi, whereas the Prussians are in this sort of eastern side of Brussels. We'll just come back here. One of the good things about this battlefield, or this kind of flying, is you can see the forest that was behind Wellington. So you come out of the forest from Brussels, and then you're onto the battlefield. So this area here, it has got a lot of buildings in it. There is a modern roads and stuff like that. But if you imagine that these buildings weren't here, this was actually, you can see how this would be the forest that backed the battlefield. We'll come back to that and the significance of that later. But what we're looking at in terms of the British is that they're actually more stationed over this way to the right. And we'll head down towards Mons, and then we'll have a look at the area where most of the British were cantonment. So it's an interesting difference between Napoleon and Wellington. So Wellington is definitely a patient guy. He's and his patience is an asset, one that probably you could argue Napoleon lacked. Wellington was very experienced with the power of the sea, the Royal Navy backing up his army. Britain never really had a continental army. They're more kind of like expeditionary forces. But it usually meant that he had to have a line of supplies back to a port. But he was very, very adept at keeping superior forces on their toes. His Victoria campaign on the peninsula, which was the summer of 1813, it has it looks, it feels, and maybe a little bit defensive, that campaign, but he was manoeuvring 400 odd miles with superior forces against him, but he wouldn't allow those forces to concentrate. He was well aware of Napoleon's tactics. He studied them. We know he studied them. He studied his 1814 campaign in France. He actually says, I have studied the 1814 campaign of Napoleon very much. Bonaparte beat the Austrians, Prussians, and Russians, different armies, all with the same troops. I have had experience enough to know how very exact a man must be in his calculations and how very skillful in his maneuvers to be able to do that. Classic Wellington complimenting someone else at the same time lumping his name in with them. So you gotta love the man. So we're just heading off here, just gonna check out this sort of area to the south and south west of Brussels. This is the area where a lot of the British troops were cantonment, which means they're stationed here. They're spread out quite a long way because the impact of the soldiers on the local population wanted to be kept at a minimum, but they needed forage for their horses. And we'll head over here to Braine-le-Comte. So you get familiar with some of these names that we're going to be using during the campaign. And when Wellington takes over the army in 1815, he comes back from Vienna. He goes about organising it in a very exact way. And I've just realised we'll have a little break here, so I know when to chop it off for you YouTubers out there. So this is going to be the end of episode 32. And in episode 33, we'll carry on talking about the British Army in Wellington. And we will fly over to Braine-le-Comte. We'll go and have a look at Mons. We'll then try and head back around, just having a general look in this area, this beautiful photogrammic area of Belgium. And so, yeah, I'll see you in a mo if you do all the liking bits. You'll also see up above, by the way, if you're watching back on YouTube, you'll see all these little postcards popping up, and they'll have all the playlists, different playlists we've got, and the Minecraft Blueprints channel will be somewhere up there. Good. If you're on Twitch, I'll be back in a second.